Redditors with interesting hobbies. What do you do and why? Chemistry. I have a full-on laboratory in my basement. I'm not talking about a science kit, I have over $30,000 invested in it. I used to run an online chemical store from my home. No, I don't make drugs. AMA. 30K invested in laboratory. Not making drugs. Bruh. What do you make? How do you handle waste disposal, and if you have a fume hood, does that just get vented outside? What other regulatory considerations are there to setting something like this up? Also, what kinds of things do you do with your setup? With my limited physical ability, I think my sunflower garden with a 9 feet 9 inches tall plant is interesting. Go sunflower go. Needless to say, I keep her in check. I grow carnivorous plants. They are super interesting, and they get rid of flies. Has one ever bit you? Archaeological geophysics to find Roman roads. I managed to find a previously unknown Roman small town. Hey, can you maybe give me some advice how to get into it? Beekeeping. It's fascinating to learn more and more about the complex life the bees have. Also, it is incredibly rewarding to eat honey that was made by your bees with the flowers and trees in your own garden. Edit, typo. That's amazing. Keen to get into that actually. High school teacher and musician. I built a little project studio a few years ago in my basement. I've now helped a few young rock and roll bands get demos recorded to get them gigs. Some of the players have been astounding, all have been appreciative, and it is a great way to see what kids are up to outside of school. Turns out I really like producing music that isn't mine. Real life school of rock. Love it. I build stone walls on my property here in Vermont. Weekends are spent walking deep into the forest which surrounds me and search for rocks to pry out of the earth. I try to find the largest which I can safely carry and give them a bear hug and carry them back to the wall in process. There's something incredibly satisfying building with stone, no mortar, and finding that perfect fit as though that rock has been waiting for thousands of years for this purpose. Sometimes the fit is so good that I start back in amazement and look around as though to ask, did you see that? Even if no one saw, that's still cool. I've hiked through Vermont and always wondered about all those stone walls. I figure everyone has a different purpose and history, but building them kinda boggles my mind, so much effort. I blacksmith as a hobby. 'Cause I'd like to make it my profession. I have 5 iridium bars and cash. Can you upgrade my watering can? I started making a little aluminum forge from a YouTube video, and melted down a ton of cans. My creativity muscles are pretty well atrophied, so I have a blob of aluminum. Then, I decided to forget the forge, and see if I could make a wood fire in my fire pit hot enough to melt aluminum. Did that about a month ago. Last weekend, I decided to go for copper, and succeeded. I still don't know what to make, so I have another blob of metal. So, I wouldn't say I'm a blacksmith, but I can melt stuff with wood fires. Maybe my hobby is seeing if I can make a 2000-degree wood fire in my backyard? My little brother farms mealworms and cockroaches, very successfully, sells them for a profit, and feeds them to his geckos. Also he builds terrariums full of mosses and centipedes etc. Edit, he's gonna have fun reading these replies smiley face. He can expand the mealworm end by targeting chicken owners too. My girls love mealworms. Your brother sounds like a cool guy. I have a really bizarre hobby that I hide from a lot of people, so I made a throwaway to share it with y'all. I like to help cam models with career development. I help with the SEO writing of profiles, tutor them in English, and get them custom graphics for profiles, and help them with other things that pop up while working as cam models. When I lived abroad, I befriended a bunch of girls working in the sex tourism industry. They would show me around the city and buy me all sorts of food. In return, I started tutoring them in English. Once I moved back to the States, I got a TEFL certification and wanted to teach English abroad. But that didn't work out. Fast forward a few years, some of my friends started getting involved with cam modeling. One of the new girls came from a poorer village and didn't know much English, so I agreed to tutor her as a favor to my friend. Word of mouth spread, and more models reached out. I kept doing it because I enjoyed it. After a few changes in the industry and getting to know what the models wanted help with, I started helping out with things like SEO writing, pricing, and other random business-related things that are difficult without a strong grasp of English or a bank account in the US. Edit, whoa, thank you for the gold. You really shouldn't be embarrassed about this. I honestly think this is one of the cooler things mentioned here. I sing Gregorian chant. It takes daily practice and much concentration to sing chant stylistically and musically correct with proper intonation, but its beauty and transcendental qualities are rewarding. Yeah, but how often do you get asked to do the Halo theme? One of my favorite hobbies is writing letters. I have pen pals all over the world, and I love reading their stories and learning about their cultures while also sharing my own. It's a great way to get to know about places you may either not have known about before, or had some misconceptions about thanks to the media. I love slowing down to concentrate on a person and respond to their letter, making my own envelopes and decorating them, choosing pieces to go into them with the stationery, and hopefully giving them something to smile about when the letter arrives in their mailbox. It's a lot of fun, and it can be very rewarding too. Reddit is kinda like a whole website full of pen pals, that's why I like it. Although handwritten letters dope. I'm a male knitter. I took it up in honor of a very good friend who died suddenly on the eve of her 31st birthday because of an aortic aneurysm. She would spend all year knitting scarves and hats for the homeless and needy to give out at Christmas. I inherited all her knitting stuff and kept up the tradition in her honor. I've been having my own existential crisis lately, and let me just say hearing this brought me so much peace. Your friend was doing something to change the world, and with her passing she continued to do it, posthumously. Beautiful. I'm a fire juggler and I'm learning to throw knives. At my college, we have to take what is known as wellness classes. Basically, you can do anything from talking about your feelings to learning underwater basket weaving and parkour. My roommates asked me if I wanted to take the juggling course, and now after a few years of practice all three of us can juggle fire. At my college, we have to take what is known as wellness classes. Are these for credit? I build electric skateboards. Want something that goes 40 miles per hour around town and can do it for 20 to 30 miles? I'm your guy. It takes a lot of research, time, and money, but it's worth it when you ride on your death machine that you made yourself. My teacher built one and broke his arm and a door while testing it out in our school. I like magnet fishing. It's taking a strong magnet and putting it in canals, lakes, or any water bodies and pulling metallic objects out. People find all kinds of cool stuff like guns, old coins, metal safes, swords, and it helps clean the water bodies as well. I've never done this but have done something similar. I once tied a hook to hundreds of yards of fishing line and flushed it down the toilet. And flushed and flushed and flushed. Hoped I would catch something cool like a ring when I pulled the line back in. It was poop. I caught poop. My more unusual hobby is collecting paper maps. I have every US state and Canadian province, plus most major cities, and since I'm in Florida I have every city or county in this state. I started this many years ago, and I'm glad I did. I got most of my maps free from either state highway departments or through my AAA membership. Unfortunately anymore most state highway departments quit publishing their own maps, and AAA's selection is very sparse now. But there's nothing like correctly folding a paper map and being able to use them either to study the place or navigate if you do use them. GPS is fine, but I like paper maps better. I don't collect maps per se, but I keep all the maps I acquire, be it tourist maps of cities, AA map atlases or old maps inside second-hand copies of National Geographic magazine, and have a sizable collection. GPS is fine for basic navigation purposes and Google Maps is good for an overview and testing out different routes on the map, but nothing beats a paper map for studying an area and getting the lay of the land. I build log furniture as a hobby. Feels really nice to take deadfall and turn it into something that can be enjoyed. I collect high school and college yearbooks. I have over 400 of them, going back to the 1890s. They're a microcosm of an era and a specific location, and are fascinating. Any sick burns you've found scribbled on the pictures? Dirt. I like making compost for my garden. It's endlessly fascinating to watch plant matter decay over months and years, and there's endless combinations and methods. Also growing plants for carbon sequestration, since that is a hot topic lately. I just learned that I really enjoy restoring old hand tools. There's a few subs that focus on stuff like this, but those dudes are pretty hardcore and are light years ahead of me. I just started. Restored a double bit axe, but I didn't seat it on the handle correctly. Skeptical smiley face. I've got a few hand planes and a draw knife next on the list. Gotta finish up that axe, though. Astronomy and astrophotography. Started because I wanted to take cool pictures of stuff in space. But taking good photos of deep space objects takes hours, so I bought some stargazing binoculars to pass the time while my setup took pictures. Then I started learning about the constellations and the history behind the naming and the stories and stuff. Got hooked to astronomy more than the photography. It's a great hobby, but it's tough since the equipment can be pricey and you have to do it at night. Also, my favorite objects are in the winter, so I usually end up doing super cold nights out in the high desert for best viewing. Frigid here just thinking about it. Makes it hard to go out more than 3 times a year. But when I go, it's usually for a couple days camping trip with viewing photography every night. Now I miss living in Southern California. Joshua Tree was my favorite. I collect, restore 80s and 90s electronics. Started with retro gaming gear, moved into 2-channel stereo gear, then portable CD players, and now I'm on a ThinkPad binge. Apnea training and freediving. Just learning about the body's cardiopulmonary system and how you can make it adapt to surviving 5 to 7 minutes underwater has been amazing. And there's nothing quite as peaceful as being underwater and feeling no urgency to move quickly or return to the surface. The ocean animals are also a lot more relaxed when you have that calmness and aren't exhaling bubbles like a scuba diver. So how do you do that? I don't know if it's interesting to anyone else but me, but I study controversial, challenged, banned or previously banned movies, everything from The Devils to Necromantic. I like to see how far I can push myself, try to place myself in other people's shoes, what makes me, and other people in general, uncomfortable when it comes to what they're willing to watch and what they aren't. Why might that be? Personal experiences? Where they were raised, social taboos, how they vary from country to country. Religious hangovers? Political histories? A guy the first know is fond of really dark humor, for instance, but dislikes anything to do with self-mutilation of the eyes. Another person I know will watch the goriest of films, but will not go near any film that has any blasphemy in it. They both have their own personal reasons for it. It also brings up a lot of questions about censorship, the impact movies can have, and one of my favorite things is analyzing how movies can make us feel so uneasy, through looking at the likes of the soundtrack, the cinematography, etc. In my work I'm now known as the guy who watches weird shit. I'm weirdly proud of it. Edit, holy shit. Thanks a lot for all the feedback, guys. I really appreciate the questions, recommendations, etc. I'll be sure to reply to everyone. I build custom mechanical keyboards as a hobby sometimes. I enjoy typing on different kinds and stylizing them to try and give them some sort of persona depending on the kind of key switches I use, basically how they feel when typing and how loud they clack. They're very satisfying to see completed and even more satisfying to type with. I carve wood specificity for the slivers left over after carving. I dye the slivers and make them into flowers. I also dye and paint acrylic, watercolor, anything really, paper to make flowers. I really like making flowers in unusual ways. Thanks op. This reads like a massive set of interesting mini AMAs. I restore and operate vintage railroad equipment including steam locomotives. Shoveling 5 tons of coal a day is a real kick in the ass, but I've been crazy about steam since I was a little boy, and it's neat to get to keep these skills alive 60 plus years after the technology died out. Woodworking. I started doing it because I like to make stuff with my hands. Turns out I have a pretty good ability to do it, so I went from making simple things like picture frames to making trestle dining room tables. Disclaimer, if you start woodworking because you think it'll be cheaper to build your own furniture, you're wrong. When you get good, sure, you can make custom furniture for cheaper than you can buy it, but getting your tool collection to the point where you can make that furniture is very expensive. I collect currency from different countries that aren't in circulation anymore. If the 10 million Turkish lira comes back, I will be a millionaire in the US. I smuggled 2 East German coins out of East Berlin, in my shoes, in 1976. I was terrified, but I have 2 East German coins. I do cross-stitching and sew my own plushies, amongst other granny-type crafts. My mom taught me to sew when I was young, and now that I have kids I've moved from mostly clothes to making things like stuffed Bobo MBs and banthas. Cross-stitching is wonderfully relaxing and tedious all at the same time. Perfect for my temperament. My hobby is collecting hobbies. So far, I've collected almost all of the stringed instruments and plan to learn beyond the first 10 pages of the Insert Musical Instrument Name for Dummies books. I also have some rusty old cars that may become something one day, or possibly get sold for scrap. And you don't even want to see my juggling equipment. I am a dungeon master for a D&D group. I got into it when I was about 17 and my roommate at the time made me play while he held the role of dungeon master, but was grooming me to become a DM so he could finally play again. Now I haven't played for years because I am always the dungeon master. 'Twas a gift and a curse. Bagpipes, isn't that popular, but hey, it's alright for me. I live outside NYC and my favorite pastime is going in the city and doing nothing. I post up and people watch, walk around and observe and soak in cultures and interactions. My dream's to write a movie and I use this as inspiration to write but also to gain a cultural significance. Aviculture, care and keeping of birds. Why? Because it's fun. I enjoy them. And they are sweethearts. Currently have 11 due to breeding. However, I won't be keeping the entire clutch. I am going to hold back one female if the one I think is a girl actually is. She's the only one that's in the mutation I want to breed one of my other birds with and he is definitely a male. I knit blankets and hats for babies in hospital. I was in hospital 2 years ago, and there was a very kind lady who saw how much pain I was in, and always tried to distract me. She told me that's what she does when she's bored. I never got to say goodbye, or thank you to her before I moved to another ward. This is my way of paying it forward. Heart. Wall climbing, specifically bouldering. I do it because I hate working out but I'd hate getting diabetes more, and it feels more like a game, problem solving than a workout. I'm also terrified of heights so it's a good way to confront my fears. I say that my hobby is finding new ways to not touch the ground. I rock climb, pole dance, and do aerial silks. If I could spend the rest of my life hanging out upside down, I would. Speleology, going into caves, exploring them, etc. My parents brought me into a cave when I was 6 months old and when I grew up, I continued with it. Caves are very impressive tbh, lots of formations, stalactites, stalagmites, and for those wondering, I'm not living inside one. I make books from scratch. I make my own covers, cut all the papers for the inside pages, and sew them together by hand. Bicycle touring. Every once in a while I like to load some camping gear onto the back of my bicycle and disappear for a few days. It started when I was 13 years old. I was surfing the RIAMA and I came upon an AMA by a guy who had cycled from northern Alaska to the southern tip of South America. I enjoy cycling, I love camping, and I'd recently returned from my first international travels, which I very much enjoyed, so I was very interested. After reading his AMA, I discovered bicycle touring and crazyguyonabike.com, where I spent a ton of time reading about other people's travels, and how I could follow in their footsteps or tire tracks, one day. Finally, the summer when I was 16, I felt confident enough about it to pitch the idea to my father. Not the idea of cycling around the world, but just starting small, riding 40 miles to a state park we'd driven to many times before, spending the night in a campground, and then cycling home the next day. The first try went terribly, but I have it another shot a week later, which went off without a hitch. And I loved it. So the best summer, I stepped up my game to a 4-day, 200-mile trip. The year after that, I was 18 years old. At this point I'd decided to take a gap year or two. On pace for 3 between high school and college to spend a year or so biking across the country. So after spending one last summer screwing around with my friends from high school before they scattered across the country for college, I did my biggest trip to date. In mid-September, I left my home in south-central Wisconsin on a 3-week, almost 1,300-mile journey clockwise around Lake Michigan. It was an incredible experience, honestly a highlight of my life so far, and it really convinced me that this was what I wanted to do. After that, I got a job, just a basic retail job, and worked full-time, saving up for that big cross-country trip. I worked that job from December of 2017 until just this past June. Along the way I used some paid vacation time in October of 2018 and flew my bike out to Asheville, NC to spend 2 weeks cycling up the Blue Ridge Parkway and then over to Washington, D.C. My last day at my job was July 1st. I've spent the past couple weeks buying a few new pieces of gear, and taking classes on bike maintenance and first aid. In another week or two, I think I'll finally be ready to go. I'm about to realize a dream I've had for almost half my life, at this point. I'm a bit terrified, but definitely more excited than scared now. Edit. I just realized I got so distracted with the story of how I got into it that I forgot about why I do it. When I was about 12 years old, I started using cycling as a coping mechanism, to get out of the house when my parents were fighting, which ultimately led to their divorce, 5 years later. And I've loved camping my whole life. Some of my earliest memories are of the camping trips my family would go on in the summer. So when I discovered that other people had combined the two, of course I had to give it a try. Why did I stick with it? A lot of people look at me like I'm crazy when I tell them about this, especially considering most of my trips have started and ended in my driveway in Wisconsin. Like, who wants to watch the endless cornfields roll by at 12 miles an hour, day after day? But moving that slowly gives you time to find the beauty in the mundane. The way the cornstalks sway in the breeze on one side of the road, the birds chirping in the forest in the other side. I can't count the number of times I've stopped to watch some wildlife, lots of deer, a few raccoons, an owl once, and as I was standing off the side of the road, drivers would pass me, they might slow down a bit and look at me, like, what's the crazy bike dude looking at, but they inevitably drive off before noticing the wildlife. And the other really big reason I love it is all the wonderful people I meet. My first exposure to this was on that second trip I mentioned. I camped in state parks all 3 nights. The third morning, I woke up and ate a basic breakfast of a bagel with peanut butter and some dried fruit. As I was taking the tent down and loading up the bike, a guy from the campsite across the road came over to chat. He said he saw the bike, and the lack of a car, and started asking about what I was up to. I told him all about my trip, and he eventually invited me to join him and his family for breakfast. I noticed they were coming bacon and pancakes, and I'm vegan, so I politely decided his offer, saying I had a long day ahead of me and wanted to get an early start. In hindsight, I should have joined them just for the company, even if they didn't have anything I'd eat. Then on the Lake Michigan trip, I met tons of awesome people as well. They'd see me sitting at picnic tables in town parks, and come to ask about the bike. A lot of them would offer to top off my water bottles, or give me food, or just chat for a while, which was always appreciated by this solo traveler. On the Blue Ridge Parkway trip, I decided to do something fun to forever remind myself of these people. On my way out of Asheville the first day, I had to stop at a Walgreens for bug spray, and while I was in there I grabbed a couple of silver Sharpies. Anyone I met along the way, whether they just asked about my trip for a few minutes, or they gave me a ride to a restaurant where I could wait out a miserable rainstorm, was invited to sign the frame of my bike. I thought this would be the birth of a long tradition, but after just 2 weeks, my bike was already completely covered in names, along with comments of good luck, and safe travels, and even an I love you bro. It's really inspiring, not only later during that trip when I was counting big mountains, but even just commuting home after a rough day at work, to look down and see all those well wishes there. Sometimes I hate bike touring. It's not always sunshine and butterflies. Some days truly suck. But even those days are kind of fun in their own twisted ways. To paraphrase someone much wiser than me, you'll never tell the story of the time you reserved a campsite and then checked into it without issue. Instead, the bike touring story I tell most often is the time I almost got hypothermia while climbing a mountain, and ended up hitchhiking to a restaurant where I could wait out the rain with some warm food. But those days still add to the experience, and they make the really, really great days all the more better, knowing the shit I pushed through to get there. When you travel by bicycle, you truly experience the world in a way you otherwise can't. Every single hill you climb, every mile marker you pass, every headwind that finally fades away, are achievements of their own. Traveling by your own power is, in my opinion, the best way to make it about the journey instead of the destination. And so I guess that's why I love bicycle touring. TLDR, every once in a while I load some camping gear onto the back of my bicycle and disappear for a few days or weeks. Why do I do it? It forces me to slow down and truly appreciate the everyday beauty of our world, and I meet tons of awesome people in the process. I'm a board gamer. I have around 600 games in my collection, ranging from lightweight games and party-style games all the way up to 11-hour-plus train games 18xx. I have a couple of groups I play with, but regular nights are midweek where we have a couple of beers, chat about all schroes and rattle through a few games. It's a great hobby and so sociable. Plus, if you find a friend like me that buys all the games, then it's almost free. I feel like I collect hobbies themselves. I love learning new things and can get really passionate for a while before I find something else to try. I find learning new things more fun than doing things I know how to do. I do comedy and theater as a hobby. I live to make people laugh. It is a community of like-minded people, and I actually make a few bucks off of it too. I collect swords and take medieval weapons classes. It increases my confidence and gives me an interesting workout. Teaches me a lot of control, discipline, and helps with social skills. Also, to be honest, I like telling people and watching them go, "What the F, seriously, you?" Painting. Acquire paint, apply to canvas. I've heard so many people say they don't know how to paint, get a brush and start doing it. Make shapes, mix colors, repeat. If you want to be a realistic painter, study form, lighting and practice. Watch Bob Ross if you want to do scenery. Learn color theory to see what colors complement each other and why some seem to clash. The point is that there is no one way to paint. Emulate others to get a start, copy a painting to see what it involves. Get an idea and paint it. If it doesn't work out how you wanted to, paint it again and again and again. Do this for 10 or 20 years and see how much you improve in that time. Very few people have natural abilities in this respect, but like any creative endeavor, you get out of it what you put into it. I guess mine is a little tame comparatively, but I make ice creams, sorbets, and gelatos from scratch, including inventing my own recipes. I make a different flavor every week, and have done about 100 by now. It wins me many, many friends at the office. I like to make things. I can jams, jellies, and pickles. I make candles. I crochet scarves and other articles of clothing. I build planter boxes so that I can grow vegetables that I can use in cooking and canning. I like to collect rocks that are shaped like hearts. It's hard to find them, but since I found the perfect heart-shaped rock on a hike with my husband, then boyfriend, I've loved to search for them ever since. I collect rare and historical toilet paper brands. That's Charmin. Crocheting. But I like to make weird stuff, not boring scarves and baby blankets. Right now I'm making a life-sized zebra head mount taxidermy.